Lenny Pickett, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Where are you coming to us from right now?
My apartment in Tribeca.
Tribeca. But you're from New Mexico originally, right?
I was born in New Mexico, but
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't live very long.
Okay. Well, what time or how old were you when you ended up moving? You went to California right from there, right?
Yeah, my parents moved to California when I was two.
Okay. And so you spent most of your childhood up until the point that you moved to New York, and that was all in California?
Pretty much in Berkeley, and then for a few years in Bolinas, which is West Marin County.
Oh, okay. How old were you when you first started getting into music? Was sax your first instrument?
No, I played clarinet from the fourth grade. I
Mm.
was nine. Typical, they bring the instruments around to your classroom and show them to you, and you pick out what you want to play. That
Was
that was
anyone was anyone in your family a musician? Is that what inspired you?
no, no. I just liked music. I always liked music. I wanted to play an instrument when I was younger, and just couldn't convince anybody to let me do it until the school offered it. So,
Once you started playing, even though your family wasn't really, they weren't musicians, were they supportive of your aspirations to be one?
well, I didn't really aspire to be a musician initially. It was just something I enjoyed doing. Um, uh, no, nobody was in support of me becoming a professional musician. Even when it looked like a likely possibility, people tried to talk me out of it,
What
which
do they
is,
want you to do?
oh, well, my father was a scientist, a mathematician. He thought I would make a good scientist. And my mother just wanted me to have some gainful employment. People, she'd been married to a musician. My stepfather, my mother's second husband, was a jazz musician. And, that's why I was indoctrinated into that fairly early. I knew what the life was like. And anybody in their right mind would choose something else, I think.
Did you show any interest in science at any point?
Oh yeah, yeah, I did. But I was curious about it. Um, but music was a necessity for me,
Hmm.
whereas nothing else was. Music made everything work. I firmly believe that if you can do anything else besides be a professional musician, you should try that. Um, if you find that you're able to do something else, you should do that. I can't recommend it to anybody.
My father was like that because his family, he always wanted to be a musician. He was in like punk rock bands and stuff in the '80s, and they were always hesitant about it. And he ended up becoming an electrician. And so for a huge part of my life, there was that thing of my dad being like, "Oh, you should become an electrician." At one point, he realized, he's like, "You know what? My family didn't give a shit about what I wanted to do, so I'm not gonna, do that to my kids." But there is a period of time where I'd considered wanting to be an electrician, and now that I'm in jazz school, I can say that that probably would have been a better decision.
What school do you go to?
I go to the new school in West Village.
What's your instrument?
I play drums.
Uh,
Yeah, I
okay.
took a took a class. I have another one from Jeff Countryman, which
Yeah.
he was on my podcast, and so that's how I met Jeff, was through the new school, because he teaches a bunch of audio engineering classes and stuff like that. I think he teaches a podcast class, which is ironic because I took that class before I started this podcast. So
Mhm.
if I once I get the money rolling in, I guess I owe Jeff some money.
Right. Right.
But so early on, you said there was some jazz influence, but what was the main thing that really made you want to play music? Was there a specific genre that you're like, I gotta play this?
Uh, well, I was like my friends. It was the '60s. I listened to Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton and all those people. But at the same time, that soul music was kind of important. Stevie Wonder and Sly and the Family Stone and people
Hmm.
like that were around. Sly was local. Sly was a DJ on the local soul radio station. So he was sort of a presence in the Bay Area, and I was moved by his music. So it was a combination of things. I don't really consider those things to all be that distinctly different. I know there's a million different categories now, but to me, it's all African diaspora, musical influence music, music with a beat. Mm.
And so because I heard you say before that you've always liked music that people can dance to, and now that because and that type of the music that people dance to changes on basically a yearly basis. And now that you're working at a place like SNL where there's a new musical guest every week, are you you're kind of forced now to hear what is up and coming and what's current? Do you think that is kind of helps you to stay up to date on what the newest dance music is of the day for so long into your career?
I like that aspect of the job. It does keep me current, though. I'm suspicious of what I'm seeing because it's the things that are the most popular and the most mainstream. So I know I'm missing a lot. There's
Hmm.
but I don't feel that bad about it. We have interns, or we up until this season we had interns, and I'll ask the interns that who's this musical act, and they never heard of them sometimes. So there's so many different genres and subgenres of music, and there's artists come and go rather rapidly, and it's not like in the 60s everybody knew who the popular acts were. There were not that many. There were only a few record labels and a few television networks, so the dispersal of the music was much more limited. And now it's there's so many different venues and people don't have labels anymore. They don't have record labels. They put out their own records, and it's a very, very different experience now. But I feel like there's so much different music that it's really difficult to stay completely current on everything. It would be a full-time job.
Do you think if you weren't working at a show like SNL that you would make an effort to specifically say, like, you know what, maybe I don't like this, but I'm gonna just try to listen to what maybe it's not what's popular all the time, but whatever it has some traction nowadays that's different than what I'm used to.
Well, I I'm not proud of this, but I don't really listen to that much music anymore. When I'm doing music, I I do my own music,
Hmm.
and I find that I have a limit to how much music input I can accept. I don't go out of my way to listen to music anyhow, which is probably a fault. But I find that it's exhausting because when I listen to music, I listen to it for so many different aspects of it. It's not simply for pleasure. I can't help but analyze it, and it keeps my mind so active that it can be exhausting.
Yeah, I have a lot of trouble, especially with drum stuff, since I am a drummer. That there are times like I'll be talking to my girlfriend, and I'll be like stressed out about something, and she'll say like, "I'll just listen to some music and relax." And the thing is a lot of the times if I'm stressed, I can't listen to music because I'm just gonna be sitting there thinking like, "Okay, wait, what is he doing? Why can't I do that? Why am I not doing that?" All that kind of stuff. And so I get that aspect of it that when it's what you do, it's how you think, that it's kind of hard to just sit back and listen to it as someone on the street would hear it, which stinks because as a musician it would be really nice to hear things completely objectively, don't you think?
I think as you get older that that lack of objectivity, the pure subjective experience of music becomes more and more difficult. When you're young, it's everything is new and fresh, and it's easier, and you haven't really tuned into it as much. But the whole act of listening to music, the whole act of playing music is listening. Uh, the what would I think it's Thelonious Monk said, um, "Don't listen to me, I'm accompanying you." Uh, when, when, but it's very difficult to be in a situation where music is being played and not to listen to it with an analytic attitude about it. I find that I tend to dissect it because I spent so much time in my life trying to understand music, and the method for doing that was to analyze it. So it becomes habitual after a time, and it's a lot more difficult to listen to things with just the totally subjective experience of doing that.
Hmm. And back when you were young and you were first learning how to play the instrument, You end up studying, you drop out of high school and you end up studying with Bert Wilson. But besides that, you're self-educated. In that period with Bert, were there any specific things that you picked up with him that you think have stuck with you since?
Bert was very generous with me. He let me spend a lot of time in his apartment. Bert was had polio when he was a very young child, and was confined to a wheelchair. And I would run errands for him and help him out around his apartment. And he would play records for me for hours, and I invite me to jam sessions, not so much to play, but to listen with his friends. His friends would come by and bring their instruments up to his apartment, and they'd play up there. That's how I first found him. As he lived on the block that I lived on, and so I would stand out in front of his apartment and listen. But he talked about music and about ideas, and it was illuminating, and it introduced me to a lot of music. And we shared ideas about the instrument. And he wrote a few exercises out for me, advised me as to what kind of things to learn. I was interested at the time in learning how to play chord changes, and he gave me some help with that. But a lot of what was happening with my playing was going on through a lot of very personal, deep, long study hours, where I practiced like incessantly. I used to practice 6 or 8 hours every day, regardless.
Did you feel like you had to, or is that just what you just did? You just did it.
Didn't have anything else to do, and so I devoted myself to that. It was what made me feel good, and the gradual accomplishment of ability was gratifying, and I felt better about the world because I was becoming better at playing music.
At what point did sorry, what were we gonna say?
That's it.
Well, so when is it now that you're doing all this practicing 6-7 hours a day? When do these screamingly high altissimo notes that you're so well known for? When did that come into play? When did you really solidify that skill?
Well, I feel like I'm still getting better at that. It's a tricky thing to do. It's a lot of subtle, physical interaction with the instrument, and it can be radically changed by just changing your reed or having a funny day. So dialing that in is still something that I'm doing. I started doing it really early on. I was confused. I got my saxophone. There was a band director. Her name was Miss Magnuson, and she had fire engine red hair, and pictures of collages of cats on the wall in the orchestra room.
Sounds like his character.
It was, and she would conduct with a heavy, 2B drumstick and bang it on the music stand to keep time with the orchestra and with the band. And she performed her duties with great fury and engagement. And I was playing clarinet in the band and in the orchestra. She saw that I kept mooning over the tenor saxophone in the closet, and she asked me on a holiday break if I wanted to take it home with me, and I did. And she let me keep it over the summer, which was never done. And so I had no lessons at all. There was nobody to teach me saxophone. But I've been playing clarinet, and there's a crossover between clarinet and saxophone. They're same family instruments, or single reed instruments. And the fingering system was developed by BAM, and Adolph Sax copied BAM's fingering system. So a lot of it's the same. The clarinet has several different registers, each with different fingerings, and the saxophone has 2 principal registers with the very similar fingerings. But I immediately started playing wrong fingerings because I was trying to play it like a clarinet, and also tried to play above the instrument, the written range of the instrument, because the clarinet has a 3rd register and 4th register that's part of the teaching that you get very early on.
Mm-hmm.
When you learn clarinet, you learn harmonics, like the third. It overblows in a 12th, and then it's like an octave and a third, and then it's an octave and a seventh. Every other overtone, and so the fingerings are quite different in each register. But I'm looking for that on the saxophone, and I found it by accident, using something like clarinet fingerings, and started to play above the horn before I'd even learned how to finger the instrument properly. But it was because I didn't understand that it didn't go any higher.
Really? Were there any saxophonists that you were kind of trying to emulate when you were doing that sound?
Well, the popular saxophone player at the time, the only guy who was an artist with records, was Junior Walker,
Hmm.
and the All Stars, and he was on, still had records on soul radio stations. What Does It Take? Was a hit song in the late '60s, but I'd heard Shotgun and Shakin' Finger Pop and all those other songs that he did, and he played up that upper register, and King Curtis also did to some degree. I mean, it's not that unusual if you go back and look at the long list of popular saxophone players from the 40s and 50s and 60s. Many of them played in upper registers, the instrument. Maybe a different approach than I had, but it was not uncommon at all. It was, saxophone playing was similar to like electric guitar playing was in the 60s. It was a featured solo instrument.
Hmm.
The tenor sax was on. If you get, I have this record collection called Blowing the Fuse. It's a German company, Bear Family Records, released, and it's all things that copyright expired on in Europe. And it has like 20 or something songs on each CD, and there were like, I don't know, it was from 1945 to 1960, and every 2 out of every 3 songs has a tenor saxophone solo on it.
Okay.
There was a huge history of tenor saxes being the solo voice in rhythm and blues, and that version of jazz.
And how long after you take that saxophone home for the summer do you actually start playing it out professionally?
Um, I I had to get it back when I entered the ninth grade, and I got another loaner horn from that school. And in the fall of the ninth grade, I joined a band called James Levi and the Funk Machine, soul band. I was the only white guy in the band, and it was we were living in the neighborhood right near the Black Panther headquarters, and I was practicing in this park called Bushrod Park, which was North Oakland, kind of ghetto neighborhood. And James used to play basketball in the park, and I always had trouble finding a place to practice. So he heard me playing and came over to visit with me one day and asked me if I'd play in his band. I was 14. So
And so wait, when is it that you actually start making money? And when you first start working professionally?
I made money on that gig.
When were you able to first like solely pay all of your bills just from working as a musician?
Oh, I was about 16. I was playing in a band that was opening for Tower of Power in local venues, and we had a manager. My manager was Jerry Martini from Sly and the Family Stone. He was a saxophone player with Sly Stone, and he decided to be our manager. And we were working, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a week, on a good week. And I was playing on the street. I had put together a little street band with some friends, and we were playing for lunch money on the streets. And my mom had moved out, left me and my brother in the house. And so we were paying our rent and buying groceries and stuff like that.
And were you thinking at that point, you're like, okay, now I'm going to start pursuing this as a career for the rest of my life?
That really never crossed my mind. I wasn't really thinking of it as a career move. It was just like a necessity. And I realized that if I was going to keep playing, I had to have a way to survive, and gigs were a good way to do it. Plus, I just really liked playing with other musicians. It was fun, organizing bands and playing with your friends was like my version of socializing.
And talking, I gotta ask you something about Tower of Power because I've heard through the grapevine, and tell me if I'm wrong on this. Is the reason that you started working with Tower Power is because they saw you dancing along to one of their sets? Is that a total bullshit story that I've heard? Or is that true?
I used to go and dance at their gigs, and that did influence it. I also sat in with them too, and I hung out with them. They had a house in East Oakland, and I used to go out there and hang out all night with them and stuff. So we were friends. They knew Bert Wilson, and I ran into them there as well. And they rehearsed only 2 blocks from where I was living at the time. So they were rehearsing in a place that was a part-time church, storefront church, and rehearsal hall. And uh, we rehearsed incessantly, but when I joined the band, but I used to go to their rehearsals and hang out and watch them rehearse. So I was connected. I was like, I was working on it, like not so much to get the gig, but just because I was really interested in what they were doing. I liked the sound of the horn section, and I liked the rhythm section was awesome. David Garibaldi was a great drummer to dance to.
I love David. I met him a few times. Such a great guy. One of the freaking best drummers I've ever heard in my life.
Back then, you would go to see a band if the drummer made you dance, and he was great with that. The so I was attracted to that. I would pursue other bands that had the same quality. There was a group called Cold Blood that I used to go see play. A guy named Sandy McKee, I think, was playing drums with them at the time. There was a lot of great bands in the Bay Area at the time.
How'd you get the job to you played on Earthquake's second record? That was right before you worked with Tower of Power. How'd you get that job?
I knew Robbie Dunbar. He was I stopped attending high school classes in the 10th grade, but I lurked around the practice rooms at school, and the band director there used to hire me to play the gigs. You give me $10 to play the performances, and they go to the competitions and stuff. And so I would rehearse them at the lunch period, and Robbie was in that band. And so I knew him from when I was like 15 years old. And then I played in bands that were associated with that. It was a small group of local musicians who played the same venues. I guess that's probably still that way in different places, but there were a few gigs you could do, and we did some frat parties and did cruise what was it, prom parties and things like that, and some nightclubs, and so I was sort of the local, there weren't that many rock saxophone players. The saxophone players tended to like gravitate towards wanting to be serious jazz musicians, and my focus was really playing rhythm and blues and rock and roll. And so they were looking for someone to do something like Junior Walker on the record, and they called me up to do it.
Yeah, and, talking about you getting hired for things, I've heard you say in the past that 3 things of advice you'd give to people is to say yes to most, if not all, opportunities, to show up on time, and to not complain. Are those things that you kind of always had innate? Are those just natural traits for you, or are those kind of things that you developed maybe through some, I don't know, negative professional experiences?
The saying yes was just necessary, because if the opportunity presented itself and you didn't say yes, then you weren't working. There weren't that many opportunities, so whenever one would come along, I'd always agree to it. So it's the advice is somewhat retrospective. Showing up on time, I'm habitually on time, but I found that people appreciate that. When you show up late, they worry, and I had like a obsession with promptness that came from other experiences. different people that are sort of tilt different ways in that respect. But I was always on time, and I found that people appreciated that, and not complaining. Once you get in a situation, you don't want to upset the people that you're working with by
Absolutely.
sounding like hesitant about it. So, and you don't have to do it. Like if it's true unbearable, wait till an opportune moment and gracefully duck out.
Mhm.
But and while complimenting the people on your way out the door.
So you don't burn any bridges.
You don't want to burn any bridges, and there's no reason to. It's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice.
Have there ever been any times that you look back on and being like, I know you said you always showed up on time. That was always a thing, but have there ever been times where you're like, damn, I should have handled that better?
Well, kind of inverse. I did a gig with this wonderful, wonderful Haitian singer, Ansi de Rose, a chanson singer, like balladeer. And it was a really interesting gig. I really loved the gig, but I showed up on time for the first rehearsal, and everybody came in 2 hours later. And I showed up 2 hours late the next day, thinking that was the right thing to do, and everybody showed up 3 hours late. So I just behaved inappropriately by habit. So I'm not good at unlearning like habitual behavior like that. I mean, when it serves me well, most of the time I can stick with it, but occasionally you find out that that's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
But those are the exceptions rather than the rule. Maybe in Haiti, it's like that all the time. I don't know.
Yeah. So now you're working, you said you were working since you were 16. Was there any point where you were thinking like, I'm working, but maybe now I'm starting to consider having a side job as something unrelated? Did that ever happen to you?
Not really. I moved to New York in '81 and couldn't get arrested here, even though I had a pretty good pedigree. Nobody was hiring me. I did like one session a month and occasional gigs. I had this crazy gig that involved meeting a bus at Roseland at 4 a.m. and driving down to North Carolina to do a sound check and a gig and head back to New York. So 2 14-hour bus rides and a gig in between. So it was kind of desperation. But during that time, my wife was working as a dancer. She was in a modern dance company from, downtown company that had worked with Robert Wilson on the Einstein dances and that sort of thing. And they had a pretty, successful career as far as modern dance was concerned. And we had a brand new baby and she wanted to keep dancing. So she took me out on the road the choreographer took me out on the road to help with the childcare and also to run the sound system. But I'd learned electronic music. I was pretty familiar with mixing consoles. I understood tape machines, and so I took a job for a while as the sound person for this dance company. But other than that, I don't think I've really ever had a non-musician job, and that was pretty close.
Did you have any shell shock coming to the city? Because like for me, since I moved to New York, I've been fortunate to come in contact with some, incredible musicians, and because I'm from a small town in central New York, so coming to New York City, that's like going to Oz.
What town are you from?
I'm from around a city called Utica in central New York.
I know Utica. Yeah.
Okay,
I think I played in Utica once.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a NYSCA, New York State Council of the Arts tour. And I think that was one of the stops we made. It was the Borneo Horns, my sax trio, with a drummer. We had 3 saxophones and drums.
Mm-hmm.
We won a grant from New York State Council that included playing all over the state.
Yeah. Well, Utica's a fun place to be, and there are some incredible musicians there. And I've had fortunate when I was a child, it was more so of a music scene around that area. I know when my father was younger, they were bringing in acts all the time. But after no matter how good of a small town you're in, there is nothing compared to a place like a big city like New York. But you had experience. Now you were working so much at Wally Hyder's in San Francisco that you were meeting people like Herbie Hancock. I didn't have that experience before I moved here. Was there still, even though you met people like that in San Francisco, was there still that shell shock of coming to a city where everyone is just so, incredibly talented?
Um, I knew a lot of people here before I moved here. It was just that I moved here in a time where, and this sounds crazy now, but work was on the decline. The 70s and the 60s had been so good that work was diminishing. So there weren't a lot of openings for new people, but since the work was sort of going downhill, and my career was sort of going uphill. But I was impressed by the people I was meeting, certainly. But many of them I'd already met because I'd been on the road a lot, and I'd run into them at sessions and things like that. So I was impressed, but I guess what I found here that was different was the kind of studio savvy that they have in New York City that's different from Los Angeles and different from the Bay Area. There was a whole different kind of rapport and a kind of very quick professionalism. There was very little time. Well, a lot of the daytime work in New York at the time was commercials. That was the rule of thumb at the time, was records at night, commercials in the daytime, because the studio rates were higher in the daytime and the commercial accounts could afford them. And the rates went down at night. So the record companies that had less to pay would take those hours. And also musicians that were the leaders on those groups tended to be night owls. So that's where, when you do that work. So working in the daytime with a lot of heavyweight jazz musicians was pretty intense, but intense because of the work ethic and because of in Los Angeles, when we did sessions there, it was a much slower pace, much more relaxed. There were longer breaks. And in New York, it was like, we got to get this done now. So you walk in, see a chart. I would always show up early because I wasn't always that confident about my sight reading, and trying to get the music in front of me and look at it for a little bit before I played. But the idea was you would do like a minute-long commercial, a 30-second commercial, a 20-second, a 15, and a 10, all within an hour or an hour and 20 minutes with the whole group.
And that's including learning the music, reading the music down.
Learning the music, reading it down. That's like a 16-piece ensemble, and do it without mistakes, because there wasn't an opportunity to go back and fix things. There wasn't enough time for that. So, and all to cut to click track, which was like unnerving. And also there was a kind of precision about the articulation in the wind instruments that was indicated in the notation, which was unfamiliar to me, because dots and dashes are not absolute, don't have absolute meaning. They have, they're gestures, but the dots and dashes over the notes in New York studio language, horn playing language, were very specific. A short note was this long, a line was this long, and getting with that was like was an upward climb for me. But I figured it out. I had to, and I enjoyed it. It was exciting work on a professional level. The music itself was always a little bit, how can you say, cut and dried.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like you couldn't like swing your ass off like very often, and there were all sorts of interesting interactions with the clients. The clients were, people who worked for, advertising agencies. So they were not exactly musical people.
Did you ever have any big disagreements with someone because you're like, hey, I'm the musician here, I know, or you just stick to whatever they tell you?
Here's my method. I often would get asked to stick around and play a solo after the session, the improvised part of it, and what they call the hole of the donut. So that would be like where the announcing would go and the commercial, and you'd fill the donut with a saxophone solo. And they'd ask me to stick around, and they'd play it, and they'd say something really strange, like, we love it, but can you make the tempo a little bit louder or something obtuse like that? Or uh, it was beautifully yellow, but we'd like a more, shade towards green on that. So, and my method of dealing with that was always, oh, I got it. I know exactly what you're saying. Totally understand what you mean. Roll the tape back. Let's do it again.
Would you change nothing?
I would, um, I would play something different, but, but with greater confidence. That I, if you express confidence to people that are, usually it would be somebody, she'd be, her first time out working for this agency, and you'd have to feel compassion for her because she was like, an environment she'd never been in before, and dealing with musicians and trying herself to show confidence in what she was doing and people looking on and I had compassion for her. It could be guys too. It was like it was always a hot seat for them.
Hmm.
So to be supportive of them was really important,
I
and
mean, to be fair, being around a bunch of musicians, even as a musician, sometimes can be awful, especially when you're a professional setting.
I could tell you stories, but I won't.
Why not? You can't do it. You'll get in trouble.
No, I won't get in trouble, but I just like I don't feel like it's productive to dish.
It's not
Um,
on the. It's not professional.
it's not only is it not professional, but it's not kind. Everybody has their foibles, and there's everybody has experiences. You don't know what happened to them that day. What was the what maybe they're having a terrible day.
I've had that so many times. Now here's the thing. I'll tell you how crazy I am. There are so many times where I'll do something that I know I'm like, I got this. I can do it, and I mess up because of something that happened earlier that day. But every time someone messes up, it takes me a minute to tell myself, like, okay, think about the fact that you do the exact same thing. You have to know that could be someone else because it's so likely that someone who's great at something or really nice had just a shitty day, and then
Right.
everything is terrible, and and they can't help it, and then you're almost the jackass for getting mad at him for it.
It's always better to be positive, and support people. Like, the, the actors at the show have taught me something, because I've had to be in bits a little bit once in a while, very, very infrequently, but I've been there 36 years. So over that time, I've done it 2 or 3 times. And it's such an alien thing for me to do, to be to participate in a comedy sketch, anything other than just playing my instrument. And I've always said, I'm nervous. I say, don't worry about it. We'll take care of you. And they fill in when you miss a line. They grab you when you're supposed to be surprised.
So
They,
you've had speaking roles in sketches.
very few, very few. But the support level that the actors give to you is unbelievable, and it's like, and I think the ethos there is make everybody else look good. I've heard them say that, that the goal is to make the other people in the room look good. And I feel like you can do that as a musician or as a human being. You can just make an effort to make the people around you look good. And
Hmm.
everything works better that way if you can do that.
It seems to me, just from the few experiences I've had of talking to people at SNL, that it seems like everyone at that show is very positive and wants everyone to be happy. Because, I mean, the only person that I've talked to, who I know personally, is Jeff Countryman. But I interviewed Don King, and now you, and then I'm interviewing Josiah Gluck next week. And it seems like everyone has this really positive, supportive attitude. Would you say that's overall pretty correct?
It's a group effort, and everybody needs to be on board, and there's really no room for anything other than very positive energy. And there's a thing about the show that's interesting. uh, you work really hard on something for a piece of comedy, and the sketch gets cut, or your bit gets cut, or the song that you wrote gets cut, or something gets
You have to
cut.
be pretty damn resilient to take
It,
that on a
it
regular
just
basis.
becomes really normal after a point, and you don't sweat it. You don't feel bad about it. You don't think I failed. You just realize this is part of this is just the course of events, the way this works. This is a bigger machine than me. I'm just playing a role here, and my role is to be supportive the best way that I can. And if it doesn't go the way that I would make me look the best, that's really unimportant.
Hmm.
It's just doesn't even rise to the level of where you should be concerned about it.
How'd you land that job originally? Because you move in '81, you come to New York, then you get picked up by SNL in what, '85? How is
85.
how does that? How
Well,
do you go from doing jingles and engineering to that?
um, well, I, I did um, I did a lot of different things, and I sort of made some mark. I took a tour in '83 with David Bowie, did the Serious Moonlight tour. So,
Was that
I
Borneo horns?
that was the three saxophone section, yeah, that I spoke about before. Um, Steve Elson and Stan Harrison and I were the horn section for that tour. Um, and and when I came back, there was I had made some connections, and I was working more, and I was doing a fair amount of recording work. So my name was sort of in the mix of things. It was, and also, I'd done this gig with G.E. Smith. I was on a Hall and Oates live album, live video. I was Eddie Kendricks and David Ruffin from the Temptations joined Hall and Oates for some songs, and they performed at the Apollo Theater. And he did mostly Motown music. And they needed a horn section. They called me. I booked the horn players, did the recording, played a solo on one of the songs. One of the songs, I think it got to be one of the singles on the record. They, Daryl and John called me back to do some more gigs, and I did another recording with them. And G.E. Smith was the guitar player in the band. Now, G.E. had been married to Gilda Radner at one point. And I think he'd worked on a show that she worked on, and he and Lauren were acquaintances, and he got asked to be the band leader for the show. And Howard Shore had come back, and Howard used to be in this band called Lighthouse, which was like a Canadian horn band, and we were sort of out at the same time as them with Tower of Power, and he was familiar with Tower of Power and somewhat familiar with me, and GE recommended me to do the show, and Howard agreed, and that was that. I showed up at an audition, but I think I sort of already had the gig before that happened. My sound was right for the show. They've always had this sort of Junior Walker-esque saxophone lead at the front and then the back of the show, and that was the style I played in, so I was sort of a natural for it.
Did they give you a chance to come in and at least sub for a couple shows or watch before you had to come in?
No, just did the show. I played with that spin-off band from Duran Duran with Robert Palmer. What are they called? The Power Station. And I'd done the show once with them as guest music, so I'd been there. No, we just did it. It was terrifying. I shook the whole show, the first couple of shows.
Really?
You're playing for 8 million people. It's like, and it's not. There's no. Can I punch that in? Can I do that over again? There's none of that, and it's an unforgiving thing. If you squeak or play a wrong note, it's like evident to the entire world. And I had a very, very audible role, and I couldn't sort of conceal myself inside the horn section. I was playing the saxophone solo. So,
do you ever go back and watch the replays of those first shows?
that's interesting you ask. We're doing the show in a very interesting way these days. And I've been staying home as much as possible because you don't want any more people in the studio than have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they provided us with is a way of watching the rehearsals. But in addition to that, there's a raft of old shows up on the same application. And I went back and looked at some things just because I was curious. I hadn't seen them since I did them a lot of times. And I went back and looked at some old shows. It's very, very, very strange thing to do, to see yourself 36 years ago playing.
Does it make you miserable to listen to yourself back then? Or are you like, I did pretty good?
Uh, it doesn't bother me that much. I feel like I do it better now, but I didn't. I wasn't. I was. My intent was right. My intention was the correct one. I wasn't very far off base. And it was again, it was a very natural thing for me to do. It was a style of playing that I've been doing a lot of, and focused on, and was very comfortable with. I love rhythm and blues saxophone playing. I find it exhilarating. To me, it's an area of jazz that is much overlooked and not mined and to the extent that it could be. It's a beautiful art form.
So wait, sorry, keep going.
No, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, so you don't have any problem going back and listening, but here, one thing that you're famous for, since in these 36 years, you're famous for never missing a single show. Which, I'm gonna be honest, if there weren't video evidence for every single show, I honestly wouldn't believe it. Was there any time, there has to have been at least once, where you came close to calling a sub, or do any particular shows come to mind in that topic?
No, I never did. I played the show with fevers and lots of distressing physical conditions, and over the time you're going to get sick once in a while. But I just kept my distance from people, and quietly made my way through the show, the best I could. It's one of the things that you have to do in showbiz, but I had experience doing that with Tower of Power. There really were no options most of the time with Tower of Power. I never subbed that show out either. I always all the gigs I made every gig. I think I missed one gig. There was an emergency at home with my wife on our first child, and I had to get out of there. I may have missed a show, but
I think that's an excusable one. I think that's one where everyone's going to be like, "That's totally fine."
When the day our second my daughter was born, I was in the studio doing overdubbing a solo. I can't remember what the project was, and it was the last song I was playing on, and I'd done like 3 solos, and I had left the phone number with of the studio with her, and she called and said she was going into labor, and I said, that last solo was great. I think we're gonna go with that one.
You're like, guys, I think the work I already did is totally fine. I think I'm good to go.
Yeah, I'm good to go. But other than that, I haven't really bailed on anything.
But in all those shows that you did when you were had a fever or whatever, were there any that you were like, really, you could hear it in your sound that you were struggling?
I don't know. I haven't gone back to listen, and I didn't make careful notes, so I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell. I can't remember. I mean, that's 702 shows so far.
Jesus.
Knock on wood.
Yeah.
And it's a lot, and it's over 36 years. It's a lot to remember. And I don't remember the guest music from 4 shows ago. So it's difficult, and people always ask, was there, a great moment in the show? And there were, but I seldom remember things. It's part of a continuum.
Mm-hmm. What point do you become the musical director for the show?
See, GE left in '95, and I took it over with Cheryl. My job at the time was, as it is again, is principally directing the band. And by that, I don't do that even all by myself. I'm playing the saxophone, so it's very hard for me to conduct and play at the same time. Liam Pendarvis, one of the other music directors, does most of the conducting. And we all contribute music to it. Eli Brueggemann is sort of the point man for sketch music, and we all participate in those things. But I'm back to doing mostly, dealing with the band, but I oversee the department. I started it when GE left. Cheryl Hardwick and I was the team then, and she was doing most of the sketch music, and I was doing most of the band writing. And I write most of the commercial break stuff and the arrangements for the opening theme and things like that. And
So are you solely responsible for doing those rearrangements? Just you go in and say, "This is how we're going to do the theme for this season."
yes, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay, what do you do when you come to go do that? Because the original Howard Shore music is very similar to the theme now, and if they, even though they're all different songs, they kind of blend in. Do you have any particular things when you go to rearrange it that you say, like, this has to stay, but this can change and it won't, sound disturbing to the average viewer? They won't say this, oh, this is a completely different theme song.
Well, there's a verse and there's a bridge, and and the chord changes for the verse and the bridge stay the same, with only minor modifications. So that's what you're hearing. You're hearing it moves between two different keys. It starts in G and it goes to B flat, and then goes back again. And I've kept that more or less the same. We modernized it. We added in a loop track, like
Is that like all the little hi-hats, like the shit like that in the background?
stuff like that. There's like some synth things. There's like some sound effects stuff. There's backward cymbals and things like that, and some stutter sounds and things like that. And I double the horns with synth horns, to sort of just they're mixed sort of back far enough that you hear the horns predominantly, but they provide sort of a flangey sort of spread to the horn sound. It's more enhancement than it is replacement. And it does sort of bring it into contemporary music production, world. All the acts, most of the acts that do the show travel with backing tracks of some sort. It's pretty standard pop music. The country acts don't all do it. Some of the Sarah Bareilles didn't do it, and she did the show. People who come from, more acoustically oriented styles of music tend to stay away from it. But it's sort of an earmark of the 21st century production style.
Do you are you the one who starts the click that cues in the intro?
No, Sean Pelton, the drummer, does.
Okay. Have you ever had any, like catastrophic technical failures? Because I know you guys use cue cards because that's one of those things it's one less variable of something going wrong. Have you ever had that happen specifically with the click or the intro?
They use cue cards because the script changes between dress rehearsal and air, and there's no way that you'd be able to do that without that. I don't know, maybe once we played without the track because something happened to the button or something. I don't know. We can always play it live. We're a live band. So it wouldn't be catastrophic if it happened, but it doesn't. Sean is amazing. Like, he's so organized. His drum kit is so organized. His pedal layout is so organized. He's a hyper organized guy, and you kind of need that to be a drummer, I think.
Absolutely.
There's so many things you have to pay attention to. It's like people don't understand how complicated it is to play a drum set. It's pretty complicated. There's all the, all the hardware has to be set up just right. And there's so many individual elements that can go wrong with it. And you have to keep backup parts. You have to have a spare clutch for your hi-hat. You have to have drum heads in case something busts. You have to have a backup bass drum pedal, but he's like that. He's got everything backed up every different kind of way. And
It's an incredibly impressive job on his part.
he's very impressive. Yeah, at what he does. He's, like, again, highly organized guy.
Besides the fact that you're not in the studio all the time because of all the new COVID protocol, how have you guys been adapting to that? Because I noticed that your percussionist Valerie, she's over in 6B, which is Fallon's studio, and they're wiring her in. Was there a big adjustment period before this new season where you guys had to get used to having to play sort of remotely?
There was a very long technical rehearsal that preceded 2 Saturdays before the first Saturday where we were, live. It took a lot of effort. Valerie was really instrumental in this because she became our COVID emissary between the musicians union and us and the studio, and we had to come up with protocols that would work. And I had this idea of using it. I didn't know where it would be, but another floor, because I know that there are fiber optics between all the floors, and we're using very contemporary wiring system for the studios. And I knew that the different control rooms, occasionally a show will have to be done from it. The mix room will have to be done. Will need to be in a different location than the show is for various reasons. And because I've talked to the engineers about that, so I knew that they were wired in some way so that the preamps were all connected together in a way that you could get access to them from another studio. So I assumed that the studios themselves would have connections to the different control rooms as well. And I got on the phone and talked to Chris Costello, our monitor mixer, and told him what I was trying to do. And he communicated. And I talked to Josiah and I talked to Jay Vicari as well, and found out that there was a way we could wire up the two different floors. And they decided to put us in old 6B, which I think is where Fallon was doing the shows before. And we needed enough space to put 12 feet between each of the horn players along with these plexiglass shields. So that was the only room that was, I think, big enough for all of that. And then we did this very long tech rehearsal. We're wired so that there's spy cameras that I can watch them and they can watch me. There's a couple cameras on them. There's cameras on me. There's cameras on Leon. And we have split screens where we can visually address each other, and then I have a new pedal for my talkback mic so I can talk to them downstairs. But it felt a little strange at first, but musically now it's very cohesive. It's like doing a gig in a studio with a lot of gobos in between you. It's like. Mm-hmm. It's being studio musicians again. I miss them being on stage a lot because it's very weird to hear a trombone solo coming from downstairs and not seeing a trombone player on stage. And I sort of look around behind me to see where I'd normally cue something or sort of play along with something, and there's nobody there. But it's worked out pretty well. It was just a very long tech rehearsal and then some adjusting after that.
Well, let's hope that hopefully if this vaccine comes in, everything can get back to normal and you don't have to be watching people on screens and all of that.
Yeah, that's going to be a thing. Yeah, it's not ideal, but we're making it work.
Yeah. So wait, I have something to ask because I wanted to ask you some specific saxophone stuff, but since I'm not a saxophone player, if I tried to ask them, it would probably be half-assed because I wouldn't know what I'm talking about. So I asked my buddy, Augie Bello, who you've spoken to, and he has
Oh,
a good following on Instagram. And I said, hey, I said, Lenny's coming on my podcast. Can you ask your fans of people or any questions they have for you? So I have a few questions from some users that are more sax oriented that I think will be a little more genuine than if I did it. But this user BCHEZNJ, I don't know how you say that. They said, do you still use Blue Box bass clarinet reeds?
I do. 3.5 strength Van Doren blue box bass clarinet reeds.
Okay. Then Annie Cosa, sorry if I said that wrong, says advice or exercises to help with Altissimo.
The Sigurd Rascher book is the best book, and all those exercises in that book are preparatory exercises for playing Altissimo. And the fingerings aren't terrific, but they're not terrible either. They're good for like an older American-made alto saxophone. But the fingerings are the least of your problems. The overtone exercises are really good, and it's what I used.
Have you ever considered writing a book of your own, or have you? And I missed it.
There's a book that I have a chapter in. I think it's called Lessons with the Greats or something like that. I can't remember all who's in it. I think Hubert Laws has a chapter on flute playing in it. And I don't remember the publisher's name right offhand, but I think you'd find it if you looked my name up on Googled it. And it has some method information in it.
Okay. Now, talking about Googling yourself, I know that you're not a big social media guy, right? You kind of try to stay away from that. That's an intentional thing that you kind of try to lay low?
Yes, there's like 3 reasons why I don't do it. One, I know from talking to my friends who do it that it takes a fair amount of time. I find that, especially when I'm working, that I don't have very much time. So I don't really want to add a necessary activity in there. Another reason is that it seems unnecessary to share all what gets shared on. I don't feel comfortable doing that. And let's see, what's my third reason?
It's okay. I think if you only have 2, I think that's understandable.
Yeah, I don't. I don't feel any great need for it. It's probably a mistake. I've been from a work standpoint. There's probably things I could get done or do if I was doing that. But I found that like I've done enough gigs and I have enough gigs. I'm not looking for work.
Yeah, it's not like you're struggling to work. So it's not like you got to be on Twitter
right,
all the time.
I talked to Augie about it, and he has an amazing Instagram thing going, and he's turned it into a whole business.
It's incredible.
It's really incredible, and he's an amazing player. And I think if I were him, I would do the same thing. If I were in his situation, the version of it that I did when I was young was go out and hang out at clubs and talk to musicians, and asked if I could sit in and get opportunities like that and get in front of the public that way. But it was a much more immediate thing. I find that my preference for socializing is to be in the same room with people whenever possible. Mm-hmm. And I like the telephone, but I prefer a landline over a cell phone. And
yeah,
I'm 66 years old. It's like I know that's like that's not an excuse. It really just hasn't been that necessary.
No, I mean, I get it. I think that's a fair excuse because there's definitely things that I'm 22. Am I 22? Yeah, 22. There are things that I think I find normal that in hindsight are kind of weird. Like you said, the idea of people just writing down like unnecessary stuff and putting it online. That's stuff that, although I don't really do that, it's not something that upsets me because I'm so used to it because that was what I was born into, and I grew up through that whole internet age in the beginning of Instagram and Twitter. But I think age is definitely an honest factor that is understandable for most people because there's some crazy stuff online that makes no sense why anyone would want to read it or watch it or listen to it.
Well, everybody has their own perspective, you know, and my perspective is born out of the experiences that I've had. And it's, um, there's room in the world for all of that. I understand the desire to, like, I can't say I've never read a YouTube comment on something that's up online, but I find the trolling to be offensive and unnecessary and not very nice.
That's 100% for sure.
And I find that like you know, my sense of the commentary when it's positive is like, well, that was a nice thing to say, but like, where's it coming from? Like, who's this person that made that comment? Like, you know, what's the context for it? You know, do they really know what they're talking about? I used to, you know, the you know, my recordings and things and concerts I'd done would get reviewed from time to time, and I would, you know, be dismayed at what the reviewer had come away with. And someone told me, well, you know, the only qualification you have to be a music critic for the New York Times is that you're a music critic for the New York Times. There's no other and that's the same with random humans. That's even more the case. Like, you don't have to be qualified to make a comment. You don't have to know anything. You can just make a comment. And I think a lot of that goes on, and I think it can be daunting for people. I'm sure it keeps people from trying things sometimes for fear of getting trolled. You know.
Have you ever read anything about yourself that got in your head for more than just a couple minutes of reading it?
No, I've been mystified by a few things, but not really. No, I thought there was a comment on I played on the Taylor Swift's appearance on the show. I don't often play on with the guest music, but she had, I guess, asked for me to do it, and I did it, and I enjoyed doing it. She was great. She was really, really good. And one of the comments online was, "It looks like a big friendly hobbit," and I thought, or something.
That's the best. That's the only thing they thought to say was that.
I know, and I thought, that's mysterious.
Did you go back to the studio and tell everyone, or did you keep that one to yourself?
I don't. No, I didn't broadcast it.
See, I know that anytime I've gotten anything negative, and I know especially with Augie, we'll come over and he'll get something, and he'll be like, look what this person said. It'll just be something hilariously mean for no reason. So I don't know if they're the type of person that likes to kind of joke around when people do that.
I heard an interview the other day with Franny Leibowitz on Terry Gross's show, and she was saying that she took a job working for Andy Warhol on his magazine, the Interview magazine, and she only would take the job. One stipulation was that she had to be the movie critic, and that she only wanted to review bad movies, because she wanted to be able to say mean things about people that were appropriate. So I think there's a certain thrill that people get, and it's a lot easier to be witty when you're being mean than it is to be witty when you're being nice. So, like, from the standpoint of like a critic or a writer, it's a juicier role to play being the adversary than to being the supporter.
Yeah, and I'd be a liar if I said that I've never seen something that in my head have thought something mean about. I think that all the time, but there's never been a point in my life where I thought something and I went, you know what? I'm going to write it and comment it. I never even got to within a football field's of a distance of that idea. I've thought those things, but there's a special type of person who just says, you know, this is what I'm thinking, and I think everyone wants to hear it, even though it's just embarrassingly mean almost.
You know, this world we live in is a torturous place for a lot of people. I feel for people who can see just from this last go around politically what kind of devastation can be wreaked that way. I hope we've learned our lesson a little bit, and we can move towards a kinder, gentler way of dealing with each other.
We're definitely going to have an interesting day on the 20th. I don't know if I'm excited, but I'm anxious to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what happens. It's a hard to be, terribly engaged at this point because it's sort of overdone. But yes, I wonder what the show's going to do. We're going to have to come up with some interesting stuff.
No matter what happens, it'll make a really damn good cold open.
It will. It's been a very interesting period working at the show. I keep running into people who say, it's just, I'm so grateful that you guys were doing that, and it's moving to hear that from people. I don't usually experience that, but I think that the show was providing something for somebody, at least. That I think because we were actually doing something live, and getting up there and doing it. Maybe it wasn't even what the shows were about, but it was the fact that we were doing something in this pandemic that enlivened people, and I think that's a very positive thing.
I can vouch for that 100% because when I was a kid, SNL was a huge part of my childhood. We had all the best subs, the Christmas DVDs, all that. My family and I would always watch SNL, and then when I got older, kind of stopped watching it. I just kind of faded away. And then when I got probably about 8 months ago, I started watching a little bit of the old clips, and I was like, man, you know what? It sucks that this coronavirus is happening because now that I have the opportunity and I really want to watch it, it's not there. And then you guys did the at-home episodes, and now watch those and you're thinking like, man, I just can't wait for everything to be live again because there's all this stuff that's coming out, and there's some great content. All the late night shows, Fallon, Kimmel, they're doing stuff from home. But when you guys came back and it was finally freaking live again, it was like a breath of relief to finally see something that was being produced at a level before all the shutdowns, and it was live, and it wasn't filmed on someone's phone. And now every Saturday night is like, Saturday is my favorite time of the week because I get to wait for that to be live,
Yeah, and it was, I can't tell you how much of a relief it was for me to play with my friends again. It's like a whole summer of not playing any gigs with anybody, playing saxophone, a wind instrument is like a liability at this point, but they've made it safe for us to do it there. And we can actually play together in the same audio space. And it's just an amazing experience. It was such a relief. It's such a joy.
Absolutely. Well, Lenny, I want to say thank you so much for coming on today. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for taking out time today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And to everyone who listened, thank you so much for being here. We're going to be live again. What's today? Sunday. We'll be live next Friday at 2 p.m. with Jackie, the Joke Man Martling. So I hope to all see you there. Lenny, stay safe. Have a good day. Everyone listening, I'll see you next week.
Wow.